Welcome to My Financial Coach Live.
All right. Thank you for coming back to My Financial Coach Live, listeners. We are really glad to have Kaylin with us today. And what we wanted to look at was the advantages of prenups versus postnups, and just how do you get that conversation started, especially since a lot of our listeners and viewers are physicians, and there's oftentimes a lot of disparities in income. And so before I go into the topic, Kaylin, why don't you introduce yourself and give a little bit of your background to our listeners?
Thank you. I'm Kaylin Dillon, and I have a business called the Prenup Coach. As far as I know, I am the first prenup coach out there. I started this business to help people at really any stage of the prenup process, but primarily my ideal goal is to help couples prepare for the process so they can have a positive experience and help with the difficult conversations and end up with an agreement that they feel really good about.
I guess let's just go down the list of things that people are thinking about. It's very awkward to have this conversation. Let's just get that. Uh,
Yeah.
let's just get that out there, right? It's just really a difficult conversation to have. And so, if you were to say, or maybe coach our listeners, how do you even start this conversation? It feels as if it's a very daunting task. You obviously love and trust this person, or else you wouldn't be getting together with them. Or if you've been in a relationship with someone for a very long time and you got married, I mean, how do you even bring that up?
Yeah. No, that's a really good starting point. Ideally, what you described sounds like somebody who knows they want a prenup, and how do you bring that up, which is a great question. But I'd like to start with how I would prefer people have this conversation, which is really so early in the process that maybe they're not even already sure they want a prenup. Ideally, I would love for every couple that gets serious, talks about combining their lives, moving in together, and certainly by the time they start talking to long term, like marriage, would we want children, all the big important conversations that couples need to have. When those conversations start, I would love for them to go ahead and have the conversation. Would we be interested in a prenup? And really, you aren't going to know the answer to that question yet. Most people won't. So it is the best time to make that an opportunity to learn more about prenups first. Learn more about what happens to your money when you get married if you don't have a prenup, and what are the pros and cons. So ideally, I'd like for couples to open up that conversation and make it just a point of interest for both of them as early as possible. But obviously, if you already know you definitely want a prenup, there's no question about it. That's important to you. There's a reason. And so you don't want to be dishonest. You should be upfront. But really, I would bring that up as soon as you're having those serious conversations, just so you know. We're talking about spending our lives together. I want you to know that getting a prenup is something that is important to me, and here is why. And would you be interested in considering this and learning more about it? And so you can still be really honest up front that it's important to you, why, but then still open up this opportunity for the two of you to learn together, because even if you're sure you want a prenup, that's totally valid, but I promise you still have more to learn first before you're really ready to start that process.
That's actually a great point, right? Maybe you are okay with what the state or the laws dictate, and having a prenup is just extra work. So that's very interesting that you say that. So let's say that most people here, they aren't lawyers, they don't actually know what the state law is, and a few years go by in their marriage and they go, I just want to make sure that we're protecting each other, maybe, or maybe I'm protecting myself selfishly, but hey, let's have that conversation. Is that any uh more or less acceptable or good than a prenup if they were to go with postnuptials?
That's a good question. In most cases, a postnup is really going to be just as strong and valid a document as a prenup. So in general, if you're already married and this is the topic that interests you, then it is definitely worth exploring. These are not documents that are thrown out at high rates. That's a total myth. Now, if you are not married yet and you have plenty of time in front of you, you're not getting married next week or next month, then there are advantages to getting a prenup versus a postnup. But they're pretty small. The main one is that there are bigger variations in the rules from state to state when it comes to postnups than there are with prenups. The prenup rules across the country are, I can't say standardized, but they're a hair closer to being a little more uniform, certainly more so than with postnups. And so it makes it a little more clear cut that you are creating a document that will be solid, follow the rules, and held up in court. Obviously, you need an attorney to guide you on all of those things. But it is just a little more clear cut. And then when it comes to a postnup, really all it means is just make sure, this is my advice in either case, but make sure you're hiring a family law attorney who has a lot of experience in divorce and with prenups. And I like to tell people when you're interviewing attorneys to even ask them, do they have experience with a prenup being challenged in court or a postnup? And you're not always going to get a yes to that, but I think increasingly we will be seeing that happen more often because we're seeing more people get prenups and postnups. So if you can get a yes to that question too, even better. That means this person has good expertise in this area.
So you bring up a good point, right? At some point, lawyers get involved. And as we know, lawyers are not paid oftentimes by just love and hugs. They take dollars. And if you were to think about this, I mean, something a young couple, they're just thinking to themselves, wow, I mean, if we're about to build our lives together, we have, the wedding coming up, we have a lot of other expenses. Financially, is this going to really put them behind if they were to even look at this as a legal protection for themselves?
Yeah. So for a couple that is interested in a prenup but really concerned about costs, there are options. And really, I also have tips really for everybody. But on the low expense end, you could do something like use Hello Prenup. There's no online option other than that I would recommend, but Hello Prenup is created by a family law attorney in Massachusetts, Julia Rogers. I know her, and the clause drafts for each of the states have been drafted by family law attorneys in those states. So it's the best resource if you're going to go with an online option. And then most of them, when you get, it will recommend that you still have an attorney review that document even after it's generated. So you're not looking at zero attorney's fees, but you can definitely keep the cost really low going that route. And so from my perspective, the cost should not be a hurdle. Hello Prenup isn't in every single state yet, so they're working on it. But that on the low end of as costs go, I mean, you're looking at the base cost for Hello Prenup is $600, and then some amount of attorney review. You might be looking at another $600 or so. That's pretty minimal when you're thinking about the cost of a total wedding. And it's also pretty low when you think about the cost of the average divorce, which is $10,000 to $20,000 just in fees per person. So yeah, that's my recommendation. But also, if you're not going that route and you are ready to hire attorneys, I tell people you can hire someone from anywhere in your state. They don't have to be in your city. So if you're in an expensive area, you can hire someone from another area of your state, and they will still be able to help you with that prenup, and probably at a lower rate. My first search is always for a flat fee attorney. There are more and more attorneys offering prenups on a flat fee basis, so you know upfront what kind of cost you're in for. And then the very best way to keep your costs low is to be so prepared in advance before even starting that process that you're really on the same page about what you want to do with this agreement.
So as you know, oftentimes it's really difficult to have that conversation, uh, regardless of whether or not you're ready to sign documents and things of that nature. So looking just at how you would go about it, ideally, what have you found that works best for the clients that you work with? What's sort of your process?
For the conversation, like
Yeah.
how to decide what you want in your agreement.
Well, I mean, ideally, right? Because looking at maybe how you've done it in the past versus what you would recommend people do now. I mean, let's say I'm in a state where Hello Prenup's not there. I'm I mean, what am I going to do? I mean, do I just find my, open up my yellow pages, find the lawyer that's closest to me? I guess now you can go online and search, but still, I mean, is that the first place I should start? What is it?
Really, you know, you really want to start with a financial plan first. So your clients are already taking the first step, which is good. Because how could a prenup should look at, who's going to be responsible for expenses. Maybe you don't explicitly write that in your prenup, but you need that information before deciding what money is whose, because that's obviously just important. If one person is going to be responsible for the majority of expenses during your marriage, the last thing you want to do is create a prenup that says, most of the assets don't go to that person. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So you have to start with just some understanding about how are we going to manage money together going forward, and what will that look like? What are our goals? All the things you already do with your clients in the financial planning process. And then from there, I still wouldn't go straight to calling up an attorney. I would, this is usually where I come in and can help couples talk about, what would be important to you to have in this agreement. And that starts pretty basic. So here are some examples. One is a couple who they're getting married for the first time, but one person's coming with significant wealth and a low income and low salary, and the other person is coming with debt, but they have a really high salary, and they're going to be very quickly on track to pay off that debt and be funding the majority of ongoing expenses. The goal for that couple is just, how do we make an agreement that feels really fair? Because the default state laws will not treat that couple fairly. Default state laws say what you're bringing is protected as separate property, and they're saying what you earn during marriage is marital property, and if you were to divorce, would be split. So basically, that spouse that's coming to the marriage with a lot of assets has a lot of special protection around this money they're bringing, whereas the other spouse doesn't have any special protections at all. And so the starting point for their agreement is like, what feels more fair than that? And then we can get a little more specific. But a couple that is, say, this is a second marriage, they have children from a prior relationship, it's a little different than just looking at their primary goal is not just what's fair. Their primary goal might be, how do I make sure I have protections for my children in our plan first? And so that high level primary goal for the agreement is going to really drive the direction of the conversations and decisions from there, because a prenup can have anything you want in it. It can be very creative and flexible, and they all look very different from each other.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit more, or I guess speak a little bit more to that, right? So oftentimes when there is a bit of a disparity, do you feel that it's more or less advantageous for one party ever versus the other? Or do you because there is oftentimes a sense of, well, I mean, I used to joke around, well, I mean, if I'm if I'm getting with someone who has more money than me, then of course it's just all about love. But if I have more, maybe maybe it's better that we outline some things. But I don't know. Is that the right way to look at it, or is there another reason?
If there's a large difference in the wealth that each person is bringing to the marriage, you could say, okay, the average prenup out there that I see for couples that did not work with me necessarily, they already had the prenup drawn up. At a bare minimum, that first draft that an attorney drafts probably is unfair to at least one person, or to one person. That's the typical way that it goes, especially if you aren't intentional about what type of attorney you're hiring. The collaborative family law attorneys and mediators do a much better job making sure that starting point is not so adversarial. But there are a lot of family law attorneys out there that's not their starting point. Their starting point is what is in the best interest of my client, period. And that's their job. So yes, there are a lot of first drafts, and then sometimes those first drafts get signed. So there are a lot of first drafts that are unfair to one person, but ideally there should be enough considerations for both partners in an agreement that actually genuinely have reached an agreement that feels fair to both of you. It doesn't mean that, when you calculate out into the future some hypothetical scenarios, we couldn't come up with how financially this might benefit one person more than the other, but a couple can come to their best guess at how things will probably play out in terms of income and their life plans, and come to an agreement that feels fair. And usually that if someone has significantly more wealth, their agreement should have some sort of assurance for the other spouse. And it could be something that is developed over time. The rules could change if you are married longer, for instance. It doesn't mean that you're guaranteeing money to your new spouse, even if you're only married a year or something like that. But that person deserves some amount of assurance. You're getting assurances out of the deal too.
Absolutely. So, Kaylin, I think what I'm hearing is prenups shouldn't only be for famous people and sports figures, and it actually works for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. So I wanted to thank you for hopping on the line with me, and I hope that all of our listeners uh, are walking away with an interesting perspective. And just to let everyone know, if this is a topic that you're interested in pursuing further, my financial coach actually has a very good relationship with Kaylin and her team. So if you have any further interest to pursue this topic, talk to your financial coach if you're currently working with us. And if you're not, my financial coach will definitely get you started on that prenup path, but also, of course, beyond as well. So that's just one of the things that we want to do, so that way all of our clients walk away knowing that they have the best plan in place.
Awesome. Thank you, Info.
Thank you very much.